All right, a very good morning to you. We have a very, very busy show for you. We're going to go to Belfast to get the latest from the Paddy Jackson Stuart Olding rape trial. We're going to go to America to speak with Brin-Jonathan Butler, one of our favourite contributors, who has written a brilliant piece for Bloomberg about how UFC actually need boxing, which is a bit of a flip of the narrative that we've been reading about how UFC was going to ultimately end up killing boxing. We're going to talk about last night's Champions League action. John Brune's going to join us just after 8:30 or 8 o'clock this morning. It'll be as much of a mystery for you out there watching as it is for me if I don't actually know the time that we're doing it. 8 o'clock, it's 8 o'clock.
It's 8 o'clock, for sure.
Yeah. How are you doing, on? Very
well, how are you?
Yeah, very good.
Any crack?
Well, you've become an internet meme. I didn't realise this. I was like, I finally saw the photograph of you and Tadhg Furlong. And it didn't strike me when the two of you were sitting right there.
Yeah.
But he's literally twice, if not 2.5 times your size.
No, that's just the way it happens online. See, as you say, you were right. You were here.
Yeah, the perception was like, oh, this is just a normal conversation with three people. But then I realised afterwards it wasn't.
It was a conversation with a normal human and a subhuman. It was kind of like a Russian doll that one person could fit perfectly into the next person.
Look at this. Look at the difference.
I just forgot to eat my protein bar that morning.
It's also because he's got his arms out, and
that's it. Posture. It's all about posture. I clearly need to sit up straighter. I need to sit out wider a little bit. That's the only thing that's going on there. It has nothing to do with natural body size.
You definitely need to learn to sit up and not slouch in the seats, particularly when.
Yeah. Okay.
I remember working with somebody who we were doing a thing with one time, and just before the TV cameras started to roll, they lifted their chair up significantly, so it was like they were towering over me, like, oh wow, what a great trick.
Yeah.
You should do a little bit of that.
Well, Tadhg Furlong was on a booster seat there, we should point out, and
it's extra great when you have a man mounted on the show. My favourite was it's Bring Your Nephew to Work Day.
Yeah, that was particularly good. I must say, I gave that one a like. At the start I was like, that's really annoying. And then I was like, actually, no, it's quite funny.
There you go.
How did it get 35 likes? I mean,
because it's very funny.
Yeah, I guess there is that.
Thrice the size. It is. We were trying to work out the exact ratio, but thrice is about right, I think.
I was going to give myself 2.5. The ratio of 2.5 to 1 is probably as close as I'd go. Thrice, okay, fair enough. This
is the type of moment that Dave McIntyre would cite years later as like, yeah, I realised that I had to get into the gym and build up my stuff. You're like, I'm going to the pub.
Yeah, basically.
I'm going to lie on the couch and watch some more Winter Olympics.
That's it. And maybe improve my posture a tiny bit, but I'm not going to the gym. Screw that.
Yeah, no, I think you're dead right. But I should say... big kudos to Owen Sheehan, who has been doing journalism proper. I mean, you realise if you've been watching any of this show that we don't do that much journalism on it, really. So there he is. That's him in action. And you've been speaking to people in underground car parks.
Yeah, basically.
In the darkness. Trying to find out what the hell's going on between Dublin and RTE. It has emerged that the 2.5 minutes that normally RTE might get the opportunity to put some questions to Jim Gavin have stopped in the Alliance League so far this season, and speculation that this was about DVDs, but you were breaking news here on Monday morning when you were like, it's not really a DVD system that RTE use.
No, it's not. I've thrown about 4 mobile phones into the Liffey yesterday as a result of conversations I've had on these phones, very seedy conversations. But basically, as I said yesterday, that these aren't, as far as my understanding was yesterday, that they aren't DVDs. As it turned out, both things exist. There is a DVD version and then there is an online cloud version of these matches. And to be fair, it was pointed out in the newspapers yesterday that the reason why managers like to get their hands on these DVDs is that RTE and whoever produces these tend to get better angles. So the analysts on your team may have one, maybe in very special circumstances, 2 cameras at matches, but of course the television companies have more. So that's the reason why you want them. Where does a DVD exist? Well, it exists in the actual van that produces these, or a truck really, that produces these matches that sit outside the grounds. I'm sure we've all seen them, especially when you're at a ground that's not Croke Park. You can see them parked outside most grounds. A lot of backroom teams just hop into the van after the match, ask for the DVD, and they're on their way, and RTE tend to give them to them. And it's kind of an unwritten agreement that RTE will hand over the footage to them because...
Yeah, and so we should stress, I'm pretty sure that TG Gar and Air Sports do exactly the same thing, that like in the trucks there's an opportunity, you hit a button and the programme gets printed onto the DVD, ripped onto the DVD really quickly.
Exactly, and I think that's actually a very valid point, and it's worth pointing out here that all the production companies and all the broadcasters do this, that there is the unwritten rule that, you know, I scratch my back, I scratch your back,
you keep scratching your back.
Mine. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, you selfish prick.
Yeah. So that way you give the DVD to the manager, and that way the manager will speak to you and won't boycott you, as Jim Gavin has done. And that's why it seems very strange that RTE wouldn't hand over the DVD, but also that RTE wouldn't add Jim Gavin or somebody to the Google Drive, which is the other element of this, on which these matches exist. And I'm saying this kind of half tongue-in-cheek, because it seems to me that if Jim Gavin really wanted to get his hands on these matches, he would be able to. Because, as I say, it is merely just adding him to a Google Drive folder.
But maybe they didn't know that. I mean, legitimately, I didn't actually know that every game sat in the cloud somewhere, because I don't have any particular reason to go looking for all of these old games. You know, you just watch the TV coverage like everybody else. Now, maybe somebody in their backroom team does know about the existence of the Google Drive and can, through fair means or foul, somehow get access to it.
Well, not even fair means or foul. Like, I would be
shared by one of their mates, basically.
Yes, exactly.
That's what I meant by foul.
Somebody
not that foul.
Somebody in the 140-man Dublin backroom team should be friends with somebody in RTE. I would be very, very surprised if somebody in Jim Gavin's backroom team doesn't know somebody in RTE and can therefore get sent the link, even if it's not authorised by the top brass.
But if it's unauthorised, then you are actually asking somebody to potentially risk disciplinary proceedings where, you know, I presume this cloud is supposed to be a secure thing for RTE staff, and so if you share somebody on that with access to it, that's a breach of security.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and say that if it's sitting on a Google Drive, which is shareable via your email, then it's not as secure as it needs to be. If it really is kind of the thing within the briefcase in Pulp Fiction that is the holy grail that football managers need to get after, then it will be on at least a Dropbox that you would require a password for, not on a Google Drive. But
yeah.
I am sure, certainly when it comes to last year's footage, it was 100% on a Google Drive. All these matches were available there, and somebody on Dublin's backroom team should have been able to get access to this if they really wanted it. So there's obviously more to this than meets the eye, that it is kind of not RTE handing over the DVD, unless, of course, somebody from Dublin went to the production van after their first game of the league this year and was given flat refusal on a physical copy of the DVD. Why that happened?
Well, so that would have been Air Sport, and that wouldn't have happened, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, exactly. So
certainly in the past it wouldn't have.
Precisely.
And Jim did speak to Air Sport anyway, so.
And is continuing to do so.
Yeah.
So it's very strange.
And TG Carr, I should stress as well, because if they had one of their games yet, I think they have. Oh, they were due to have the game last weekend.
Dublin have played Tyrone on a Saturday night. They played Kildare on a Saturday night, and their other game, which Monaghan in. I can't remember. Anyway, I'm sure Tommy will tell us an area in just a moment.
Tommy's shaking his head there going, I was paying no attention. I zoned out about 10 minutes ago.
So, but anyway, if TG Carr have had a Dublin game at this point, they will have had an interview with Jim Gavin, because that was pointed out in the press yesterday. So it's the reasoning behind this which is very interesting, and the fact that it is kind of, I want this, you're not getting it.
The other question about this was like, well, do Dublin deserve this access? Are they getting it as a preferential? Are they getting it before other teams get it? Can any other team get access to this information, and do they get access to this information?
Yeah, it's my understanding that other inter-county teams have got access to this pretty easily, and it is kind of either via the, oh hey, whoever your mate is in RTE Sport, we just send me on the link there, good luck, how are things, bye bye. And it's not even a kind of official request. It's not like an identification protocol or anything like that.
I think we should call them Deep Throat instead of Indie, but anyway.
Oh wow, thanks for that, Ger. And so basically it is kind of a very informal thing where you ring up the sports department in whatever production company has the rights to this, for the most part RTE, who have all the games on their Google Drive, and they'll share you the link. So it's very, very odd that this has become such a big thing, that this has become a story, because...
Yeah, that's what I think. That's what I think is actually the most interesting part of this. Why do they turn it into a story?
It's either petty in the highest order, or else it's a non-story at all. I'm going to say it's the former, but who's being petty here, RTE or Dublin GAA? We don't know. Well,
or also it's like, how the hell do you keep a team motivated who are on the road as long as they are trying to get 4 or 5 in a row? Like, you think of all of those, like, they're high achievers in their personal lives. You need to somehow get this sense of not everybody actually wants us to succeed here. And it's very hard, because most people are like, oh yeah, the Dublin team, they're playing great football.
Yeah.
Oh, they're such a great bunch of lads. Oh, what colour they bring. How much we need them. Yeah, let's have loads more money for development. Like, it's hard to kind of create that sense that they don't really like us, because actually everything suggests most people like the Dubs a lot.
Precisely. And like, I think people get mixed up between the perception of Jim Gavin here. Like, Jim Gavin in the media is a boring man, but Jim Gavin in the media, other than the Diarmuid Connolly situation last year, has never been somebody that like is disliked within journalists or that cohort of people who put their mic in front of them every weekend. They are, of course, dull press conferences.
So I actually don't agree that he's boring. I just think that he's probably routinely asked exactly the same questions and doesn't give that many one-on-one interviews, but when he does, it's always really interesting. So I think that he's very controlled in his message as opposed to boring, and I think that perception is wrongly out there because that's how they've decided to control the message.
And yeah, I do think that is kind of perceived as kind of a dislike for Jim Gavin, which isn't the case. But as I say, unless there's something deeper in the whole kind of Diarmuid Connolly situation last summer that we're not aware of, then that would be interesting.
Just want to play you this clip. It's moving on. Chris Froome back in the saddle in Spain in a stage race, and obviously Chris Froome, the information came out that, well, his levels were up here when they were supposed to be down here, and technically most of the time, if you believed in a clean sport, then perhaps you would suspend that rider in the period before the hearing into the twice the legal limits level is actually held. Team Sky are not part of the coalition for clean cycling. It's a French term which I'll get for you in just a minute, but they have always decided that they wanted to be outside that process. All the members who are part of that process have an automatic, if one of our riders is under suspicion or has a positive sample, then we automatically suspend them until they're clean to ride again or cleared to ride again. Primarily because Alberto Contador won a Grand Tour and then had it stripped from him afterwards because he was under investigation for a failed test. So they feel like it's one of the quickest ways to clean up cycling. David Brailsford does not agree with that. He doesn't think that his team should be part of that system. And for the very first time since the positive test, effectively, that Chris Froome had, he had to face the media in advance of this. And the BBC and Sky were asking him some questions. Have a look.
I think that was early on when he first commented, and I think to be fair to the president, he's only just taken up the role. He's new in his position, and I think for him, I guess it's a challenging situation to find himself in. And but I think he's also made the comment that he totally understands and backs the fairness of a process for an individual, whether that be an amateur rider or Chris Froome. I think everybody's entitled to the same fair approach. And I think we all back that, to be quite frank, and nobody's denying it's not it's a challenging situation, but equally I think it's only fair at this point that everybody abides by the process, and the process totally allows somebody to race in this situation, and that's what we're doing.
And are you worried that the sort of court of public opinion and this might damage your legacy as a team further down the line, whatever the outcome of the process is?
Well, I think with anything in life, you're always going to have differences of opinion, and when you sit back and think about this and think about it carefully, our society is based on the idea that the worst case scenario is to falsely accuse somebody of doing something they haven't done, and this part of the process should be confidential. Let's not forget he hasn't got a doping rule violation against him, and I think that needs to be taken into consideration, and we don't want to falsely accuse people. But people can have their opinions, but on balance, I think this is the right thing to be doing, and we're happy that we're here and ready to race.
He's a bit less cocky these days, David Brailsford, isn't he? Now that stuff like this seems to be unravelling around him. So the first question that he was asked there was about the UCI president, David Lapartien, who had said that he thought Sky should suspend Froome pending the results of the investigation. He was like, oh, well, he just said that when he just in the job, really, at that point. I don't know what the implication is, really. He's too dumb to work out that you can't say that kind of stuff, or maybe when he's a bit longer in the job he'll realise you can't speak like that. But actually that's a fairly consistent fairly consistent position from the new UCI president, who reckons that the NPCC was the voluntary organisation that everybody signed up to try and clean cycling up, and one of the things is that if you test positive or if you have an adverse finding, then you're suspended until you clear yourself.
Yeah,
which is fair enough.
When will David Lapartien realise that being the chief of cycling's world governing body does not mean looking after the integrity of cycling? That is one of the key components. I'm sure it's bullet point number 1 on the job spec is you must not talk about good things that might help the reputation of cycling. You must always, protect those who have damaged it and allow the damage of the sport to go on further and further, and you should become a petri dish for the destruction of this great sport. He clearly hasn't read that bullet point and somehow got the job while being a good man, clearly.
Yeah, so best of luck to him, and part of me kind of wants Froome to win a couple of races here, just to
like Gatlin almost.
Show how crap the exactly, yeah.
It's like, as people said with Gatlin, it was the best thing that could ever happen to athletics. I'm not sure is that the case, and would I go that far, but certainly I feel that same element with Chris Froome. Also because it'd be a bit of crack, wouldn't it? I mean, the whole world would lose their shit over, Chris Froome, because now people look at Chris Froome and it's like, oh my God, they're still doping in cycling. I'm absolutely shocked. We've got one doper who may or may not have doubled the level of salbutamol in the system. We don't know if he's a doper, but he's certainly taken a lot of his inhaler. He is the only bad guy in cycling, and if he wins a race, then he could be held up as this villain, which would be hilarious, really.
Yeah, we'll definitely wait and see what happens there. So there's the tweet from Froome. About to head to Ruta del Sol. I want to thank everyone for their support and patience over this difficult period. I am doing my utmost to ensure that things are resolved as speedily as possible. Can't wait to get this season started. Vroom, vroom, vroom. Are they dust clouds coming out of the back of his... Wow, the dust cloud emoji off the back of his bike.
Yeah.
Vroom, vroom, vroom.
I know. We may as well move on to the football, and we're going to put up, I think, probably the tweet of the night, and a tweet about the hero of the night, Andy Robertson of Liverpool. Here's Dom King, who was in Porto last night for Porto versus Liverpool. Here's what he said after the game. Of course, Sadio Mane scored a hat-trick in the process of last night's match. 5-0 win, of course. Andy Robertson proving again what a team player he is. A young ball boy thought he had a memento for himself. Robertson quickly spotted him and made sure the ball was delivered to Sadio Mane, a souvenir of a spectacular night.
Yeah, good man, Andy.
Well done to you, Andy Robertson.
Smack down those kids who are taking balls.
There's no way any little person should be allowed to achieve their dream, Andy. So well done to you for stopping.
Sadio Mane is a little guy.
He is a little guy, and his dream is more important to the other little guy's dream.
In fairness, though, he should get to keep his hat-trick ball, right? You're not saying he shouldn't. It's just that there are about 12 balls used in the course of a match, and he could have taken any single one of them.
And also because the image of this Scottish fullback running after a little Portuguese kid to get a football off him is absolutely hilarious. And I wish I was
Sadio's ball!
I wish I was in Portugal last night, not to watch that amazing Liverpool performance, but to watch Andy Robertson running after a little Portuguese boy. That was obviously the clear highlight of the night. So well done on ruining that kid's dream, Andy.
Yeah, all right. On that note, let's move on. We'll bring you the stories from the newspaper headlines. We'll do our coming up first, in fact. So we've done our journalism bit. We've got the Thursday's back pages coming up right now. Champions League latest with John Brewin. Get some strong thoughts from him on last night's Liverpool game. But also, Owen's keeping an eye really on the PSG Real Madrid match, which ultimately saw evil versus evil, and the good evil triumphed, I think, a little bit. Also, we'll go to Pyeongchang and join Cliona Foley a little bit later on for the very latest from the Winter Olympics. And boxing isn't dead yet. A brilliant line in Brin-Jonathan Butler's piece about the UFC takeover deal last year was that somebody said, worst case scenario is they just bought MySpace, which I'm sure sends shudders through the spines of the people who spent $4 billion on UFC, only to realise Conor McGregor's not going to fight again. What? Ronda Rousey joining the WWE? What? So we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Let's bring you through the newspaper headlines. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, we look at the back of the Times Ireland edition. Mane leads a rout. Liverpool 5, Porto 0 was the score in Portugal last night, as we've mentioned. On the front of the Irish Examiner sports section, Orange Crush reads the headline in relation to Liverpool's kit last night. Liverpool run riot in Porto. Ronaldo to the rescue for Real. While on the front of the sports section in the Irish Times, it goes, lethal Liverpool shatter Porto's dream. That's Andy Hunter there saying that Mane's hat-trick embellishes an awesome display by Klopp's side. You've also got Ronaldo on the double as Real stage comeback. That's Sid Lowe's piece there from the Bernabeu. While on the back of the Irish Daily Mail, they go with Mane, hat-trick in Cop Euro romp. You've also got French avoiding action over disputed HIA protocol, which is an interesting story doing the rounds since last night. On the back of the Herald, rampant Reds run riot reads the headline. Hat-trick hero Mane is full of praise for entire Liverpool team. While on the back of the Irish Daily Star, it says Orange Crush as well. They clearly got there was no kind of route of communication between themselves and the Irish Examiner last night. They both gone for Orange Crush. FC Porto 0, Liverpool 5 as a result of last night's Champions League first leg clash. Mane against boys reads the headline on the Irish Daily Mirror. Sadio hat-trick and Salah's 30th of the season inspire Liverpool. Salah, of course, now the second fastest Liverpool player to reach 30 goals for the club since 1897, I think.
Robbie Fowler first?
No, he's Robbie Fowler didn't reach 30 goals as quickly as Mo Salah.
Really?
Yeah.
So who is fastest?
I can't remember his name. I'll Google it quickly.
History or an Ian Rush type figure?
No, 19th century, 1897, I think.
He's the second. He's the first since then. All right.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
A good kicking reads the headline. There's Roberto Firmino doing his largely stupid celebration last night. Mane hat-trick as Porto given a good kicking, as I've already said. Champions League special in the Irish Sun today. Really stupid celebration. There was, I think it was Sadio Mane waiting to give Roberto Firmino a hug after he scored that goal, and Firmino runs to him and just bypasses him, and then does like a spinning kick and then another spinning kick into air, and then goes back and celebrates with his teammates.
Yeah.
Each to their own, I suppose. If it was good moves, I would be like fine, but it wasn't.
Maybe he needs to practice them a little bit, and he's probably going to get plenty of opportunity to do it. A big name duo not in race for top GAA job. This is an exclusive from Martin Brownlee. It says that the Dublin CEO John Costello and Peter McKenna, who runs the commercial operation for the GAA, have not applied for the Director General's jobs. Then he says that the shortlist includes Jarlath Burns, the former Armagh midfielder, and Liam Sheedy, of course, the former Tipperary All-Ireland winning manager. So they're the leading outside contenders, as in outside the building. The main internal candidates for the job are the Director of Communications, Alan Milton, the Head of Games, Fergal McGill, the Finance Director, Tom Ryan, and the Director of Development and Research, Pat Daly, and the Head of Information, Tomas Meehan. So that's pretty interesting. Also, Mickey Hart says that there's an agenda against Tyrone, people talking about defensive football. I suspect he's mostly talking about the Sunday game here, but he also goes on to say that people need to start thinking for themselves as opposed to just constantly referring to Tyrone as being the only defensive team. Because was it you was pointing out that the Dubs had 15 men behind the ball at one point during the game? Somebody else.
If somebody else pointing that out. Was that at the weekend?
Yeah, and every game they play, they defend in massive numbers and they pile forward in massive numbers. It's like, I think ultimately the best indication of all this defensive mindset was the interview that Mickey Hart gave to Keith Duggan in the Irish Times, where he talked about the goal that Conor Callan scored against Tyrone and how he was a bit of a bad agent because he should have been back defending as opposed to staying in his forward position. But ultimately, I think that misses the point that the Dublin forwards, a lot of them, that you will see them tracking back. You will see Paul Mannion in the left corner back position winning possession, but a bunch of them will stay forward to make sure that when the ball gets pinged forward really quickly, they're in one-on-one situations and they can actually just beat their man and score as opposed to being double or triple teamed.
Yeah, there's also the fluidity of it. That was so early in the game, and Dublin are like, well, we've got 65 minutes to rectify this if things go badly wrong, if we keep a few men extra in the other opposition half, and it clearly paid dividends, high risk, high reward. So having kind of a one-dimensional game plan that's going to last you to 70 minutes clearly is not a smart plan. I think that's the main criticism of Tyrone.
The Racing Post, Jigginstown happy with Aintree weights as Outlander heads 6 in top 40. That's a change in policy from Michael O'Leary to be happy with the weights at Aintree or in the UK generally. The back page of The Guardian, Rocket Reds, and then the curling, which hasn't quite captured the imagination as much at this point in these Olympic Games.
That was to do with Canada UK yesterday. I was watching a bit of it. I don't know what happened.
Go on.
I was like a draw. I think Canada were up 4-1. And then did Great Britain get it back to 5-5? I can't remember. As you say, it's not as exciting as speed skating.
Here, the two-man luge team.
Yeah, that's crazy.
WTF.
Yeah, no, it's...
You're basically, the job of the little guy underneath is to be squashed. It's like you just lie back and just get squashed while like somebody hurtles you back at 90 kilometres an hour round with no protection in concrete.
Yeah, basically.
No thanks.
It's a lot of fun.
How did they discover that this works as a two-man sport?
I don't know. They obviously had a low... How did luge even happen in the first place, is my question.
I guess it's just a type of sledding, isn't it? You go backwards, you go forwards.
Well, yeah, I suppose. But like, they say, oh, let's build a metal tube and let's wait for the ice to fall or this whole thing to freeze over and let's get a sled and lie down in a prone position, or let's invent one where you go head first.
Well, it's like car racing, right? It's like, we can do this really fast. Why don't we do it around a track? So you build a track.
Yeah, but like at least car racing, you go from A to B. Like, funnily enough, Joe, you don't go out get a pint of milk using your luge.
I mean, maybe you do in Iceland. Who knows?
Well, obviously in the Netherlands they go speed skating to work, don't they? From their home to work in the canals when they freeze over.
I mean, they're yeah, they do. That's how this thing happened. Like
the canals haven't frozen over since 2012.
Here's that Mickey Hart quote. Now, he got it in a way I wouldn't like by not being an honest broker. This is the Conor Callaghan goal. and going after the man he should have done. Now, I think he might be speaking a bit tongue-in-cheek here, is he? That's neither here nor there, he says. But that changed the entire turn of that game. We felt we could contain them for 45 minutes. That goal cut a hole in the team. Conceding a goal like that was not something we did very often, particularly so early in the game and through the heart of our defence. Basically, Sean Kavanagh told you that there was no plan B after that goal was conceded as well. So it does feel like Tyrone are in an evolutionary phase and that they need to get to the end of that phase quickly if they're going to be able to come back from conceding an early goal. And I just felt like when he said that there was a sense that you can't take on the Dubs if you don't diagnose the fact that they're always going to have one of those forwards who are capable of hurting you, whose job it is not to track back, whose job it is to actually be loitering with intent.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they are in an evolutionary phase. I think they'll have to come up with one hell of a game plan to be able to improve further after losing Sean Kavanagh. Matty Donnelly, I wouldn't say he's over his peak, but there's not a player of his ilk coming through. The likes of Colin McShane and Lee Brennan are the best hopes they have. I wouldn't put them yet in the same bracket as Donnelly or Kavanagh.
The Telegraph lead story, Manny Magic, rattled Skeletons rivals accused Team GB of cheating by using high-tech bodysuits. Well, that would be the first time, would it? But it's never the high-tech bodysuits or the slightly more aerodynamic bikes. I think everybody just needs to question Team GB's morality. That's what I would say about that. And in the back of the Telegraph, how ball became sport's pushiest parents. We need to do a proper explainer on LeVar Ball and the madness that is LeVar Ball and pushy parents.
He's amazing. He's one of my favourite characters, despite the fact that he's one of the characters that I hate the most.
I've done that one. So we've got the Irish News for you finally for now. Heading to the north, the Irish News is Earn men look to add steel. McMenamin defensive solidity is high on the Fermanagh agenda. So Carol Kane's story there, and the Mane hat-trick destroys Porto. So I'd say if anybody's going to be able to add a bit of defensive solidity, it's Rising McMenamin. 100%.
Fermanagh and Tyrone are on the same side of the Ulster Championship draw this year. I think they meet in a semi-final if they win their quarterfinals or preliminaries. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah, sideline cam, a full split screen sideline cam. If you're Sky, you pick that game and you go, oh, look what we can do. We can put our pay Ricey to wear a GoPro.
Yeah. I wonder, will the GAA be open to doing like mid-match interviews like they do in the Champions Cup?
Yeah, that'd be class. They should start doing that. Okay. Let's go to Belfast, and just a warning if there are any sensitive ears listening to this, that the topic of conversation is obviously unbelievably serious, and some of the details that have been emerging from the trial in Belfast have been pretty grim. So just a warning that this is sensitive content coming your way. Frank Greaney, our course correspondent, has been covering the Paddy Jackson Stuart Olding rape trial, and again, just to recap the information that was coming through yesterday, the taxi driver who took the complainant from Paddy Jackson's house to her home the night in question was on the stand yesterday. What happened, Frank?
Yeah, that's right. Stephen Fisher is his name, and he was on duty in the early hours of June 28th, 2016. He said he was driving around the Ravenhill area of Belfast City. It's to the south of Belfast City Centre, not too far from the Kingspan Stadium where Paddy Jackson, Stuart Olding obviously play their rugby for Ulster. He said that he passed a couple at one point at about 5 o'clock in the morning. He passed a couple, and he said that the woman looked very upset and that the man that was with her seemed to be comforting her. He pulled into a garage then in Ravenhill. He parked up and he got a phone call from his control room to say that there had been an affair, and it was actually at the garage where it was, and it turned out to be this couple that he had asked. And we do now know that was the complainant and Rory Harrison. Rory Harrison is the only one of the 4 accused men that isn't facing any sexual offences. He's a 25-year-old man. He's from Mance Road in Belfast City. He's a friend of the other accused at the party at Paddy Jackson's house, where Jackson and Olding are alleged to have raped this young woman at a party after a night out in Belfast City. He's facing charges of perverting the course of justice and of withholding information. The allegation against him is that he effectively tried to cover up what's alleged to have happened at Jackson's house. Now, when they got into the back of the taxi, the driver, Mr. Fisher, said that the woman gave him her address, and that was all she said. She said very little to him on the journey back to hers. He said she was very upset, she was crying, she was sobbing, her head was placed on Rory Harrison's chest. He seemed to be comforting her, he said, and he spoke about a phone call that Mr. Harrison either received or made while in the taxi, and he said that Mr. Harrison seemed to be talking in code. He said he only heard snippets of the conversation, but he recalled him saying to whoever was on the other end of the phone, "I'm with her now, she's not good, I'll call you in the morning." He described then when they arrived at the complainant's house. He said that she was unsteady on her feet as she made her way up the driveway to the front door of her house, and that she needed the assistance of Rory Harrison, who got out of the car and seemed to put his arm around her and helped her. And he said that he also noticed some staining on the backside of her trousers as he was walking up. And he was asked under cross-examination about that staining. He said he didn't notice anything unusual about it, and that it wouldn't be that unusual for people at that hour of the morning after a night out to have marks or scuffs or staining on their clothing. But he did check. He had some concerns. We checked the seat where she had been sitting, and he didn't notice anything unusual on it. He said then that when Rory Harrison got back into the car, and he was obviously bringing him home then at that point, and he said that he just asked Mr. Harrison something along the lines of rough night last night, and that Rory Harrison said something like, "You have no idea," or "You could say that," and he got the impression from his replies that he didn't want to talk any further about it.
Who else was on the stand yesterday, and what other bits of evidence were given to the jury?
There was only one other witness called yesterday. This is a young woman, a very good friend of the complainant, who was out with her. She was with her at Paddy Jackson's house, but she had been out with her the night before celebrating the end of exams. Now, we can't identify this witness because by doing so, that would obviously run the risk of somebody being able to identify who the complainant is, and we obviously don't want to do that. So she will remain nameless, but this woman said she had been out, that she was in contact with her friend, that they'd arranged to meet at Ollie's nightclub in Belfast City, and she said they did indeed meet there, and they had a few drinks together. She reckoned she had about 3 doubles that night, and she said the complainant had the same amount of alcohol, and the complainant has given evidence herself of having 3 double vodkas on the night. This witness yesterday then said that they moved into the VIP section with about an hour left in Ollie's nightclub, and it was there that she saw Paddy Jackson. Now, she said she didn't know Paddy Jackson personally, but she did know of him. She was asked if there were anyone else there. She said there were some footballers, she thought, but she doesn't really follow football or rugby. And we heard earlier in the trial that the Northern Ireland football team were there. They'd just been knocked out of the Euros. She described the night then drawing to a close when the bar closed at about 2 o'clock, and she said she was making moves to go home. And indeed she did, and she did so without the complainant, as she left with a friend of hers. And the complainant then texted her at about 3 o'clock in the morning to say that she was back at Paddy Jackson's house. And the witness yesterday said that she replied by saying, "Ha ha, how, why?" And she got no reply until about 8 or 9 the next morning. She said her friend texted her to say that she'd been raped. She said that she was in shock. There was a range of text messages we heard where the complainant was laying out the allegations that she has made against the accused. She was trying to convince her to go to the police, but the complainant didn't want to. She said she felt she wouldn't be believed, that it'd be her word against them, that they'd concoct a story, that Ulster Rugby would get involved, that they would say that she was up for it, that she was just a slut that was asking for it. But she did convince her to go to a sex assault clinic, and they went there and they got some advice. And she was referred to another clinic, and this is where she got some forensic swab and things like that. And the court actually broke up early yesterday, Ger, because one of the jurors became ill, so they didn't hear any evidence after lunchtime, but it is under cross-examination now, and that's likely to resume when the court reconvenes at 10:30.
All right, Frank Greaney, thanks very much for that. And obviously, you can continue to follow Frank on Twitter for more details of that case as they emerge today. Now, we're going to turn our attention to football. We'll get with John Bruin in just a couple of minutes' time. But the Keith Andrews Show returns live today on all of our social channels, on facebook.com/offtheball, on youtube.com/offtheball, and of course, you can listen to an audio-only stream on offtheball.com. This week, Kevin Doyle is going to join Dave McIntyre and Keith in studio. Have a look at this. It's Steve McLaren from last week's show, talking about the prospect of a winter break coming into English football and recalling a story from half-time at the 2002 World Cup when, of course, England lost to Brazil.
I've done three tournaments with Spain. We didn't know what to do with the players at the end of the season. They looked absolutely dead on their feet. If you kept them going, they'd die. If you gave them a break at the end of the season, it was difficult to get them back to the levels again. Did you give them a little mini pre-season? Did you need to? It was so difficult. And we found that we were okay at the start of the tournament, but come the last 16, the quarterfinals, we were dead on our feet. And I remember it well in Japan 2002 against Brazil. Fantastic first half. We came in at half-time. I swear, I've never seen the players were white, exhausted, gone. We were 1-0 up, and I thought, oh, we just need to hang on. Fatigue made us go down to 10 men, and in the end, lost 2-1. And every tournament since, the players have looked leggy, tired, and mentally, I think the key thing is mentally, because our top players are playing Champions League till the end. Mentally, it's very difficult to get up for a major tournament after a long slog of a season.
Yeah, it's funny how England having a bunch of English players playing into the Champions League late in the season wasn't actually good for them. Maybe now that there's so few English players playing into the Champions League, they'll actually have a better chance.
It's a good point, actually. I haven't really thought of that. I mean, there is obviously, with the homegrown rules and all that, obviously kind of more of a push towards that. You look at Manchester City with Sterling and Stones and kind of their central role in the team, and how absolutely out of it they are at this moment in time. Like Kevin De Bruyne is just begging for a break, and I think with their 3-day rest last week, it kind of felt like a 2-week holiday to them, because they had 3 days without playing high-end football.
Given they're so far ahead of everybody else in the Premier League, you would assume they'll be able to rest a coterie of players in advance of big Champions League games. Like a sizable chunk of them go away and have these mini breaks in the middle of the season, but like that's only because you're Man City and you have a bunch of money and you're really rich and you can afford to have a huge squad.
Kind of, but they had only 6 players on the bench last Saturday week. And I know that may or may not have been kind of a big point by Pep to say, look at this terrible schedule. But at the same time, as Gary Breen said on the show, you know, you've got to earn your place on the bench. And maybe some of those academy players aren't as good as some people like to think.
All right. John Brune, good morning to you. How you doing?
Morning, Ger. How are you?
I'm very well. We were just chatting about the possibility of a winter break there. I don't know if you heard Steve McLaren talking about that famous game in 2002 against Brazil when he was part of Sven-Goran Eriksson's staff, and how just wiped out the English players were at the end of a long season. I mean, we tend to joke about this kind of stuff, but actually, I guess it's very important if you are trying to produce a national team who are at the peak of their powers, when it seems other countries who have winter breaks are able to do it.
Yeah, that's true. My memory actually of that game that's the quote. It's eventually attributed actually to Gareth Southgate, now the manager, which was at half time at that game. He said, we were waiting for Sven-Goran Eriksson to be Winston Churchill, and we got Ian Duncan Smith now. So I'm not sure tiredness was completely the problem in that game. Of course, the 2002 World Cup was played in high temperatures. I mean, I've seen it said recently, which is quite amusing, I thought, which was, if we do get a winter break, then the next excuse as Englishmen that we have to move on to is that the weather doesn't suit our players. But joking aside, I do think that there is an issue with fatigue with players, and certainly the leaden football that England produces in tournaments has to have something with mental fatigue, just as well as physical fatigue, just because of the amount of games that they play. But having said that, the flip side of that argument always is that a lot of foreign players play in the Premier League, and that doesn't appear to be so much of a problem without the winter break. So it's one of those arguments that rages back and forth. It does seem that the winter break is going to come in. I don't know if you've seen this or discussed this, but there's that sort of idea of a sliding winter break where, so TV doesn't miss out on its weekly helping, that certain teams will be almost given a bye week like you get in the NFL. And then other teams will play and then get their own bye week, which is an interesting way of doing it, I think, and may well suit all parties. Yeah,
any kind of compromise that actually allows us to move on from the conversation will be pretty good. Just one quick prediction, that comment by Gareth Southgate about Sven-Goran Eriksson may well come to bite him on the ass this summer.
It may well do so, yes. I just wonder if any of the England players would know who the modern-day equivalent of Ian Duncan Smith, failed Tory party leader, was. That would be my only caveat there.
Theresa May?
Well, yes, actually, she is. You've made a very apposite comparison there. Yes.
Yeah, I wonder what. He doesn't strike me as an amazing halftime team talk giver himself, Gareth Southgate.
No, I think maybe there's a bit more steel to him than maybe in his media appearances. Gareth Southgate was one of those players who was pretty classy, but was actually quite a hard player, if you remember. And I think there might be a bit more to him than that. Having said that, maybe if you look at a couple of those England under-21 performances, there were certain points when the team did not look in need of a bit of fire. So we'll see on that. I mean, let's face it, Ger, I think I've said this to you before, and I'll say this, like every England manager's career ends in failure, so does it matter?
On that note, let's move on to the Champions League. The performance from Liverpool last night was a classic of the genre of Jurgen Klopp, and also of exactly what he's trying to achieve. It's a pity that the level of perfection they attained last night came so early in the season, but I guess, you know, you've got to be pretty happy if you're a Liverpool fan right now.
Yeah, that's right. And also, I mean, talking about that winter break thing, I think last season we saw Liverpool fade a little bit, didn't we, after January, February. They looked fresh as daisies in Porto last night. Absolutely destroyed them. I'm not sure that we could say Porto are a particularly good renewal of that team. I know they've had issues of previously. I mean, they used to rely on third-party arrangements to get players in. The cloth a little bit more. Had a few injuries. Danilo, the captain, was out. Abubakar, the striker, was out. Having said that, Liverpool were outstanding in just about every department. In fact, let's say in all departments. Absolutely excellent. And of course, that trio, if we're to call Jurgen Klopp's football heavy metal football, that's a power trio that was Motorhead, I suppose, last night, the ultimate power trio. So you've got, I mean, you have Mane, Salah, Firmino, every one of them put in a great performance. Mane takes the headlines with the hat trick, but you could put any one of those man of the match. And but Salah's goal in particular stood out for me. A piece of individual brilliance. I don't know if you remember this goal. I mean, you won't remember it, but it's one of those goals you'll see on TV. It's a goal scored by, I think it's Eddie Gray against Burnley in the 70s, where he sort of juggles, takes his time over it, and just slots it home. Also, there's a Frank Worthington one back from the 70s. Just players playing with, you know, confidence and calm. And at this point, Salah is playing with all of those things. He's just absolutely unstoppable at the moment.
I was watching the other game last night, John, but the one thing that was really evident from that game was just the ease at which both teams, particularly Real Madrid, at the centre-half position, are able to play the ball out of defence. Now, I've read that Virgil van Dijk had shown some of that last night, and himself and Dejan Lovren, and I know it's only Porto, managed to strike up some sort of partnership that is encouraging on a defensive point of view, but also the ease at which they look to be when they're on the ball. Was that the case, in your opinion, last night?
Oh, definitely. I heard Pat Nevins say actually that Van Dijk, you know, is world class after that performance, and that's maybe the thing that Liverpool have lacked at the back. I mean, you might say since Jamie Carragher retired, which will be back in 2013, they've lacked the player of poise at the back, command. The other thing that you see with Van Dijk is that he tells the other players what to do. Leadership has certainly been a problem at Liverpool at the back. I think part of the problem there is that previously Jurgen Klopp hasn't really known who his best centre-back partnership are. I'm not sure he does now. I mean, I think it's a flip between Lovren and Van Dijk, but when you've got Van Dijk, you've got a chance. And maybe it reminds me a little bit of Manchester United a few years ago, where players like Johnny Evans and Chris Smalling could come in and play well, because they were playing alongside the likes of either Nemanja Vidic or Rio Ferdinand, a player of genuine world-class ability at centre-back and a leader as well.
The one other comparison that I thought was interesting is with Man City before they actually got Ederson in goals, that whole team improved because they felt confidence in their goalkeeper, and it seems now as if the manager at least has made a decision on who his first choice goalkeeper is. There's been a bit of chopping and changing from Europe to the Premier League, and I guess this time around it looked like Karius was in and was probably going to be kept for the game, and he was kept for the game last night. So is Karius capable of the growth and development that the club needs, or is that still one thing that I think that if they did sign him, then everybody would improve in the same way that everybody has improved for Van Dijk telling people what to do. A goalkeeper added to that, so suddenly you've got two players bossing things and being vocal from the back. It's a force multiplier as opposed to just a 2 times multiplication.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think the word appears to be that Mignolet might have played his last game for Liverpool, barring injury to Karius at this point. A few whispers behind him, but about that Mignolet is not too happy about that. But ultimately, he's had a pretty good run considering how vulnerable a goalkeeper he can be. Karius, I'm not sure about personally. I've spoken to a couple of goalkeeping experts who would say probably a lot of the tools are there. It's maybe a mental thing with him. But yes, if you were to make that comparison, if they got a goalkeeper as commanding as Ederson has been this season, then the defence has to get better, just as it has for Manchester City. That's not to say that Ederson hasn't made a few mistakes. I mean, he actually made he didn't play so well, did he, against Liverpool? It was his mistake that led to Salah's goal, the one which was chipped from quite a distance out. But that would have an extra dimension. The one note of caution I would put at this point is that remember the Dortmund team that Klopp had, which was, they had good players in every position. Wiedenpfeiler, the goalkeeper they had there, I would not say was a particularly good goalkeeper. I would say if you make Premier League standard, he probably wasn't good enough to play for, a team top 16, top 17 in the Premier League. So I'm not sure if Jurgen Klopp sees goalkeeping as the most important part of the game. He just sees it as somewhere where you've just got to get someone between the sticks and hope that they do okay. And that's the thing with Jurgen Klopp's football. There are a lot of risks taken.
One last point before we let you go. I'm wondering if the result from PSG was actually exactly what you would expect from that team and the way they've been assembled. Like, you go 1-0 up away from home against Real Madrid, things are going pretty well for you, and yet as soon as a bit of adversity comes, the team crumbles. Again, I know you were watching the Liverpool game, but it didn't seem entirely unpredictable that this was what was going to happen last night.
No, I think that PSG have a psychological soft sensor, don't they, for those big games. Maybe the Barcelona defeat of last season is going to take a long time to get over. They've got a manager in Emery who was a great manager, actually, at Sevilla. But he did make a couple of mistakes, didn't he, last night? He took off Cavani, put on a right back, and then instantly Asensio was brought on by Zidane, or around the same time. Asensio takes them apart from the left-hand side. The one thing is, though, I'm going to have to read these names out, because the thing is, Lo Celso, of course, is the guy that gave away the penalty. There's a couple of players there that I would say, and just looking at them, are not particularly distinguished. Presnel Kimpembe, who played right back, and Yuri Bachirche, who played left back. Now, Bachirche, I was reading, had a spell on loan at Cheltenham Town. Now, with the greatest respect to Cheltenham Town, that is not a breeding ground of great footballers. I do wonder. It reminds me, actually, do you remember LA Galaxy when David Beckham went there? You'd have David Beckham on, X £100,000 a week or whatever, and you would have this group of players who were sort of college kids. You do wonder that the amount of money that PSG are paying for Mbappe and for Neymar, keeping Verratti, whether the players they've got below that level are of sufficient quality to take you all the way through a Champions League campaign, which ultimately the aim for PSG. But having said that, Jimmy Traore has a Champions League medal, so you just never know.
Yeah, ironically, I thought Pachiche actually did all right last night, but only because of the fact that Real Madrid were attacking through Marcelo on the opposite flank for pretty much the entire game. But you mentioned Marco Asensio there, who was pretty much a difference maker when he came on. And that's the really worrying thing for Gareth Bale, is that not that he was left out, but that when he was brought on to make a difference, it wasn't him that made the difference. It was Marco Asensio who made all the difference for Zidane. And you start to look at Gareth Bale now, and you really start to wonder, what is his future like under Zinedine Zidane, Real Madrid side?
Well, yes, and the other thing to say there is that you look through the Real Madrid team, they need an overhaul, and they need a bankable, cashable asset, and Gareth Bale is one of those players that you would have thought they would try and cash in to an English club, hope that, and take him back to the Premier League. That's Gareth Bale, I think he was brought on for Benzema and played as a centre forward, wasn't he? Which is not his position, let's be fair. And when you've got a young player like Asensio coming through, Real Madrid, just as they always be, are prepared to be ruthless. I don't imagine they think that they owe Bale much. And funnily enough, I don't think Bale owes them much. So you could see, and let's face it, this speculation has gone on for about the last 5 years. You could see him linked with the likes of Manchester United pretty soon. You'd expect to see those stories starting to come out of Spain, maybe drifting over to the UK. We'll see. But yeah, the point is that, Bale perhaps doesn't have long for the Real Madrid world.
John, great stuff. Thanks a million.
Cheers, lads.
John Brewer giving us some thoughts on last night's action. You enjoyed that game?
The last 2 matches have been amazing. Juve Spurs and PSG Real Madrid. Like, we've discussed this yesterday about the grotesque capitalism that exists in top-level football. But grotesque capitalism is amazing to watch. I love it so much. It's brilliant stuff. It's people who kind of can easily shunt all that stuff into the bottom drawer and forget about all that. It's amazing. It's just brilliant football, you know? It's like, I will, delighted to be part of all of this.
All right.
But on a serious level, I really did think PSG, and I think Bruin mentioned it there, in terms of Unai Emery completely bottling it on the line yesterday, like a really terrible decision to bring on Thomas Meunier and take off Edinson Cavani, or as he's known in these parts, the Uruguayan Diarmuid Connolly. Cavani wasn't exactly amazing. It was just his hold-up play, the movement he made to put PSG 1-0 up. It was essentially, if it wasn't for his run, PSG wouldn't have gone 1-0 up, and to take him off was just an absurd decision, and to try and put Dani Alves a little bit more advanced on that right-hand side. Both of those goals end up getting created then on Real Madrid's left flank, which has essentially knocked PSG out of the Champions League.
All right. So NUIG Galway held off a late comeback last night from DIT to move on to their first Sigerson Cup final in 15 years. Here are the goals, courtesy of Higher Education GAA and Jerome Quinn. Classic throw it over just before somebody scores a screamer of a goal. That's Owen Finnerty, the sub, scoring the second goal there. Sean Kelly with the first one before half time, 2 minutes from the break. DIT obviously had a fairly strong team out. Dublin's Brian Howard, Ronan Shanahan from Kerry, Mayo Duo, Conor Loftus and Danny Kirby, and NUIG were led by Damien Comer and Peter Cook of Galway. So busy time for Damien Comer. And what did you say about Kerry's midfield?
Well, they're going to be missing for the game against Monaghan on Sunday, because they are the UCD midfield, who also won after extra time last night. So, at least it's good to see that Ronan Shanahan's out of the Sigerson Cup final. No offence, Ronan, but Kerry kind of need you with the two boys missing in midfield. So, I'm willing to kind of go straight on the record and say I'm willing to sacrifice DIT's Sigerson triumph for Kerry beating Monaghan in the league, because I don't particularly care about DIT.
That's the real spirit of the GAA right there.
I didn't know I was walking into this.
Right, so Joseph Conroy is with us because we're talking UFC and how they absolutely need the help of boxing to survive, or do they? This is the premise of a brilliant piece written by Brin-Jonathan Butler. Brin-Jonathan, good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
My favourite line from your entire piece was, the great fear here is that they've just bought MySpace.
That was really the germ for me doing the whole piece, was when a friend of mine, an attorney and boxing manager, Kurt Emhoff, can you not hear me?
Yeah, we can. All good.
Sorry. A friend of mine, an attorney and boxing manager, Kurt Emhoff, made that analogy, and I thought, there is a big piece here, because everybody understands exactly what that means.
Yeah. And so they're terrified that they've invested in something at its absolute peak or on its way down.
Absolutely. It's a huge bubble, $4.2 billion that WME spent to acquire this property that's not coming anywhere near the projections that they've tried to offer. So it's fascinating, just the perception of a sport like boxing, that you hear this boxing is dead, which was another germ for this piece, which is how long have people been saying that? How long has that perception been there? And the answer is 119 years people have been saying that. It's still here. And it's endured a lot of lean times over a century. The question is whether the UFC can endure some lean times as it's struggling with producing some new stars to replace some of the old ones. And I think it's going to really struggle a lot. And, this piece was really just sort of mining a lot of different people in both sports to sort of understand the data. And the data does not look good.
So talk to us a little bit about that, because the sense that boxing is going through a lean time isn't actually true at the moment. Like, we've seen some absolutely amazing proper super fights where the best fighters in their weight division and weight classes are finally meeting each other. And obviously there was the Mayweather-McGregor fight, which we can kind of separate for a moment. Sure. As an outlier, but as a harbinger of everything else that has been going on. There have been some really good figures coming through for boxing on the traditional networks.
That's right. Boxing's on TV, and when it's head-to-head with the UFC, contrary to perception, it's destroying them. It's doing way better numbers, and it's doing better numbers with a younger demographic, which is the key demographic they're looking for. So that really goes against the image that the UFC's tried to perpetrate as this new kid on the block, and it's just destroying boxing because boxing is an old man's game in terms of their audience. So boxing's on ESPN, it's on regular TV, and huge numbers of people are watching, even not big-name fighters, like not just the McGregor versus Mayweather, but when it's on TV, millions of people are watching it. And it's only been there now for a little over a year. So I think that there's a lot of upside if they put on really impressive fights the way it used to be in this country. I mean, if you look back at Muhammad Ali versus Leon Spinks, I think that had something like 80 million Americans were watching that fight. There were only a few channels at that time, but I mean, this was like the moon landing sort of figures that it was getting in terms of an audience. And the UFC, just because it's not producing its stars, it's really killing its idols. It's forcing them to go head-to-head all the time. They have some of the lowest paid athletes in professional sports, which is a major problem. Ronda Rousey, which really transcended the sport. The people who are beating Ronda Rousey are not becoming Ronda Rousey. So it created a role that was sort of a one-off. So there's a big problem there as well. I'm not sure where the future stars are going to come from when they can't make any money. And Conor McGregor, after moving into boxing for that farce that they put on, wants a share of ownership, which would set a terrible precedent for anybody else who sort of emerges as a big star. So I'm not sure what Dana White's going to do. And I did reach out to the UFC and WME for comment, and some of their quotes were pretty laughable in terms of their optimism. It's just not backed up by any of the numbers.
Because ultimately that's a double-edged sword, Brin-Jonathan, as in you almost need the sports stars to transcend their own sport for you to propel this thing up to the level of boxing. So you have Ronda Rousey, she's ended up leaving the sport. You've got Conor McGregor, he's ended up wanting a slice of this pie, and a big slice at that. But to actually get to boxing's level, you probably need a few more of those stars, but you also need them to kind of stay in line.
Absolutely right. Yeah, you need stars, and usually what we see, at least in boxing, is the stars that really resonate with an audience have to be there for a while. We need them for 5 years, 6 years, and that's just not happening. The shelf life in the UFC is really, really brief. And the other big problem, of course, is that they're all popping for drugs. You've got Brock Lesnar, you've got John Jones, you've got Anderson Silva. Drugs is just a major problem. It's been a free-for-all in the UFC, and there's so many elements of the UFC, even more so than boxing, that are just a complete black box. We don't know how they're running their contracts, which is why Kurt Emhoff featured so prominently in the article, was because he's dealt with these contracts. He's aware of what they are. He obviously can't disclose exactly in specifics what they are. But one of the comments he made to me is, if you compare them to, say, Don King contracts, and we know what Don King used to write a blank piece of paper, push it over to his fighter, and say sign it, and then he'd fill in the rest. That UFC contracts he said, are not as bad as the worst Don King contracts, but they're not far off, which is a standard current contract for UFC fighters. So I'm just wondering if it's trying to professionalize. It has a lot of antitrust lawsuits that it's facing right now. There are just huge problems that are confronting the UFC as it sort of becomes a major sport. And some of the projections that Dana White was making in terms of we're going to be bigger than the NFL, which currently is earning something like $14 or $17 billion, there's nothing to back that up at all. So it sounds nice. And it's nice that some of the people that I interviewed from the UFC are optimistic, but nothing in the data supports it. And so that was sort of what the story was about, was just assembling a collage of sort of all of this data from many different angles. And I wasn't cherry picking the data. It's pretty straightforward data that you want as an investor. So it's just really hard to understand what the WME was looking at in terms of where it's going to go in the UFC in 2, 3, 5, 10 years.
And just in terms of the sport continuing to grow and kicking on and getting Conor back in the octagon, do you think that if they want to get to this NFL level, this kind of next level financially, get this bigger audience, is co-promotion the way they're going to have to go? Will they have to start paying kind of boxing style money to these fighters? Like, is this kind of low purse model, has that just come to an end?
I don't think it's come to an end. It's just a question of whether it's sustainable. So, I mean, they're moving into boxing. They've made overtures to it, and that's definitely where they're going. Al Heyman has a big problem in that he's shut off of TV. He dropped huge amounts of venture capital into trying to bring fighters to television. He did it poorly. He didn't put on fights that people wanted to see. They were buying it in order to be on TV. TV wasn't paying them to have it on. And so Heyman is probably going to bring his stable of fighters to sort of move into some kind of model that him and Dana White are going to create together. I just don't know if it's going to be able to compete with ESPN and some of the good fights that we're seeing on there. You had Rigondeaux and Lomachenko getting a very considerable audience, and it's unusual for small fighters to sort of resonate with an American audience on TV, but it did. And it certainly annihilated the UFC in terms of the numbers that were on the same day. And I think that's happened all 4 times that the boxing has gone head-to-head with the UFC. So I don't know where the UFC can go other than trying to use boxing, as is the title of the piece, as a lifeline at this point.
How would that lifeline actually work? So they would just partner up and use their airtime and use their real estate to get fighters on, or would they be half a fight card and half a UFC card? Like, do we know what that blend will actually look like?
We don't know, and they're cards to their chest in terms of exactly how they want to do it and calibrate that model. We've never seen it work particularly well, so I'm not sure. And Rousey is left; she's not coming back. She's gone to wrestling. A lot of these UFC fighters are moving to wrestling because there's better money in it. It's safer for them. So I'm just not sure exactly how they're going to do it, or if it's something that people are going to watch. One of the great models that the UFC came up with was the reality TV show to show you young fighters on their way up. You'd have older fighters mentoring them. That show's not working very well any longer. Fight Pass is another means that fans have to sort of watch fights. The numbers are not great there also. So they've run into some missteps over the last couple years, and they've sort of offering the projections based on McGregor-Mayweather. I don't know if that's something that can be repeated in terms of garnering that kind of audience again, because the result was just abysmal. I mean, it was cartoonish.
And of course, this investigation comes against the backdrop of the UFC most likely finalising a new TV rights deal. How damaging is this lean period going to be in terms of those negotiations? And do you have any feeling for kind of what type of a deal they're looking at?
Yeah, very much so, because what they're looking at is the projections they had were, I think, making in the neighborhood of 700 to 800 million, and they're actually making about a quarter of that. So it's another issue that the sale of WME was sort of predicated on that basis, that they're going to do huge numbers on television, and they just haven't come anywhere close to those projections. So I think there's going to be a reassessment, and just as an image problem, signing a big deal with Fox Sports, because there's nowhere else for them to really go, that number is going to be a lot lower than what they were offering in terms of in the lead up to signing with WME.
And of course, there's kind of other issues happening in the sport as well. We've seen Bellator kind of stealing a bit of a march and signing some good new talent, stealing some free agents from the UFC. If the UFC kind of continue down this path, and if it's kind of being run as this entertainment company and that model's not really working, they're not getting the blockbuster fights, how in danger do you think the future of the organisation as a whole is?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question, is how marginalized could it become? As you try to compete with other major sports, it gets harder. I mean, it used to be, one thought I had is sort of like an indie band on its way up. So it has these fans that are incredibly devoted to it, and then once the band reaches the mainstream, a lot of those fans feel alienated, like it's not ours anymore. And I think the UFC is confronting that issue, in that as a mainstream entity, a lot of its business practices now that are forced to be more transparent, and it's very resistant to being transparent. And the primary reason is because its model is terrible for the people that are actually participating in it and exposing themselves to so much risk in the sport, which is going back to just the shelf life of these great fighters is so low. And you have to ask, why is it so low? Because they're not protected the way they can be in boxing. There's no way you could create a Floyd Mayweather having a sustainable, undefeated record for such a long period of time, where I'm not saying he didn't fight names, but he was very much able to sort of be his own boss and look after his career and sort of curate what are fights that can make money but are a little bit less dangerous. There's no way you can do that in the UFC. So I think a lot of fighters that might go into it would be hesitant, to operate in the existing model that it has, which is completely good for Dana White, but it's not good for fighters. I mean, these guys are making nothing relative to their success in the sport. I mean, even Rousey was not making any kind of money commensurate with her audience or the kind of publicity she had. I mean, she's one of the most famous people in the world, which is insane. I can't think of another sport where a female transcends not just, bigger than Serena Williams in tennis in terms of just being the face of mixed martial arts. It was incredible, her trajectory. I don't know how that's going to happen again.
Joe, you've obviously been covering UFC for a long time now. The year where this deal ends up getting done is on the back of the 2016 year, where it looks like there are a bunch of fighters, and McGregor is just one of a number of fighters. It turned out he wasn't. And you were saying that, so Nate Diaz is obviously somebody that did have that crossover appeal. Again, partly because he fights McGregor, but absolutely because he wins that first fight. So we haven't seen him back.
There's an interesting point, though. Even kind of by the time you get to Diaz 2, McGregor Diaz 2 happened just days before this deal was finalised and publicly announced. And even to make that fight, the Fertitas had started kind of bending their rules and doing things like they'd put a whole division, the 145 division, on hold to make this fight happen, which was kind of the start of this unsustainable model, which I don't know if you have any opinion on this, whether they were starting to kind of poison the well a bit already, starting to kind of do things that didn't make sense for the longevity of the sport, but were delivering these massive numbers and creating this massive star.
No, I mean, when the UFC began, one of the initial suggestions they had about how to organize it, it seemed like they watched Bloodsport and thought, let's try to recreate this. No, but I mean, it's even worse than what Bloodsport was with the Kumite. Originally, they were going to have a shark tank, like, encircling the ring. There was going to be barbed wire. I mean, these guys were outlandishly creative and ballsy in terms of the approach that they had. But you're just seeing, eventually, not having professionals, but people sort of flying by the seat of their pants. There are problems with that kind of approach once you reach the mainstream, or else boxing has been sustainable as a black box where you have an equal mixture of people with Harvard MBAs who are running it, and a Don King comes out of prison to run it just as well. A lot of his ideas get incorporated by the Harvard MBA people, but there's no oversight, there's no regulation, there's no governing body. that is something which has left boxing, as Jimmy Cannon said, as the red light district of sports. And I think the UFC is a corner in the red light district of sports that people who would otherwise enjoy prostitution would avoid just because it's so dangerous.
And kind of at this juncture, going to a point where we're going to be sort of setting cards for the summer of 2018, how desperate will the UFC be to get Conor back in there, and kind of what type of money, what type of deal do you think could happen?
Well, I think they're desperate to get Conor back in there. I think he's their only big star, and he's the only big star who hasn't been pinched with performance-enhancing drugs. And he definitely transcends the sport, even transcends sports. He's a tremendous character. I watched him while he was doing his promotion in New York. I mean, he's electrifying. I mean, I wasn't encouraged by some of the ways in which he was inciting an audience in Brooklyn when he came with Mayweather, but there's no question that he is a great character. But what he's talking about in terms of taking over some kind of part ownership, that's a precedent that would be, I think, a death knell to the UFC, because anybody who's going to come up is going to want exactly the same thing. And these guys have been very resistant to relieve any control. So Conor has some pretty interesting bargaining chips about coming back, but I thought his shtick all along was almost better suited for wrestling than it was for the UFC. And Rousey now, we're going to see what she's going to do in wrestling, but I mean, it just seems like a logical place for him to go to capitalize on his audience and take a lot less risk and make a lot more money. So I'm not sure what the UFC is going to have to do to bring him in, but giving up partial ownership seems like a non-starter.
Brin-Jonathan, thanks very much for joining us and for staying up for us. Cheers, man.
My pleasure. Take care.
Brin-Jonathan Butler there. You can read that piece on Bloomberg, and we've tweeted it out on the Off the Ball account, or at Off the Ball AM. It doesn't feel like McGregor's coming back, but when you hear about the dearth in the sport of real superstars, and that Diaz won't fight unless he gets the same money, or the type of money he would only really get for fighting McGregor, you realise he does have a bit of power. Yeah,
it still has a knock-on effect on guys like, they've recently had a card fall through where they've tried to get Diaz, and Diaz has been kind of tweeting and kind of flirting with the idea of coming back, but then when push comes to shove in these negotiations, he's saying no to everything that isn't Conor, and also, like, a lot of the reports are he's just kind of chilling out on a yacht and doing triathlons and living the good life. You think of a fighter like him, he wouldn't made peanuts all his career, walking away with whatever amount of millions he made from those two fights. It's hard to get these guys back in the octagon, especially if you're doing this, if you've got this model that is just trying not to pay anyone anything.
Yeah, so the main issue is that everybody's on a contract, and we would have spoken to one of the fighters who was coming towards the end of a contract, and he was talking about his first fight was 12 grand, his second fight would have been 24 grand, his third fight was 36, and at that point he's like in the top 6, top 8 in the world. Like,
even with these contracts, they're actually technically more like freelancers who are kind of contracting themselves out to the UFC, but they're not employed by the UFC, which affects their ability to unionise. When you start going under the surface and start hearing these guys talk, it is like, obviously they love the sport, they just want to do it,
and that's exactly why I think that a massive global corporation thinks, we'll pay $4 billion for this. Look, this is amazing. You're basically exploiting your workers and taking all the money. It's like, it's the perfect model. But after a while, you start to realise that they're risking their lives and there will be long-term damage to them. So they think they want a bit more money.
But they're also paying $4 billion for something which is deemed by some to be the sport. People look at UFC, and a lot of people say, oh, UFC is a sport. It's not a sport. Imagine if you could pay $4 billion to buy boxing. Like, you would absolutely buy that at a drop of a hat. And of course, as we've just outlined, MMA has nowhere near the power of boxing, and it doesn't have the history that it has, and is faltering in big markets compared to boxing. But still, you're essentially you're buying a monopoly of the top athletes in one sport.
Yeah, well, but you're not anymore, because Conor McGregor broke the model.
Well, that's the thing.
But also, they had damaged their own model as well. This Reebok deal they'd done, which is a massive corporate deal for them, which was part of the idea of it was kind of window shopping. We're working with these kind of blue chip companies prior to the sale, but which took away the main revenue stream for most of these fighters, which was having, if you have Xbox on your shorts, if you've got Budweiser on your shorts, bringing in massive advertising money, you're now told you're not allowed to do that anymore. You can't have these private sponsorship deals.
You did feel like you had some way of controlling your own revenue and your own income, which somehow gave you a sense of, at least, you know, if I fight and win, I'm going to get a massive sponsorship deal. But when they take that away from you, it's like, no, you're getting your 36 grand.
And that's also that option is still being offered by their main competitor, Bellator. So if you go over to Bellator for less money, you can still be running your own kind of business and be in control of it and getting your own sponsors.
Yeah.
I would like to get Brin-Jonathan back on. I'm not sure does he have a deeper knowledge of it, but there's one line that stuck out to me from the Bloomberg piece, which I'm sure we'll tweet out, just about Poland and Brazil and the fact that boxing has never penetrated those markets, but the UFC is huge. Of course, with Brazil, you can list off countless huge stars that they've had that have almost transcended the sport as much as Conor McGregor has. But with Poland, maybe not so much, and you start to think, is there socioeconomic reasons here that there's more of an appeal about UFC, or that when the boxing boom was happening, these countries weren't as developed and weren't able to enjoy the things that the United States had to offer on cable television and stuff like that. So there could be a separate piece in that, but it's something that certainly stuck out to me, that it's still the dominant combat sport in two huge markets.
Yeah, even in Ireland though, what our pay-per-view events in the US are on your basic kind of BT package here, where, so say a massive UFC fight is more accessible to the Irish public than something that's on, say, UK box office boxing fight where you have to go and add something onto your bill and go to the problem of going and buying it.
Yeah, I mean, there's also like a demographic element to this, in that, like, somebody was saying that the UFC audience are basically white rednecks, and that that was a valuable coterie of people for a large organisation to buy access to that audience on a regular basis.
That's in the United States, I presume.
Yeah, but, you know, I mean,
the NRA is a rich organisation.
Like, yeah.
If you can tap into the same market as the NRA, you go for that business model.
Well, I'm not a million miles away from thinking that that's exactly what happened in this instance.
NASCAR makes a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly what it is. It's the NASCAR audience who, you know, at the end of the night want to flick on after a few Bud Lights and watch stuff. And, like, for whatever reason, that's not the case in, I don't know, the audience is in a very interesting audience in Ireland.
We're probably oversimplifying things a little bit.
Obviously, deliberately, but, like, I mean, that was certainly, that was what the boxing fraternity would have said about that audience.
Yeah.
That the protagonists were fairly cookie cutter in terms of the Americans, and you know, the Nate Diaz's of this world are a bit of an outlier. Right, that took us down a rabbit hole. Next, we're going to go to Cliona Foley in Pyeongchang, but first, here's Stephen Ferris from Wednesday Night Rugby last night on the blossoming even of an unlikely relationship.
I'm not so sure. It's a funny point you make about the referees. I sat beside Eddie Jones at the World Rugby Awards in London last year. And as soon as I sat down, I looked at the name card beside me and it said Eddie Jones, and I was like, oh, here we go. But he was a really nice guy, asked loads of questions about, you know, rugby. He was trying to more or less pick my brain about Ulster and about Ireland, and just seemed like a really sound, dead-on guy. But the kind of image he portrays to the media would seem completely the opposite to that. Because anybody I speak to says, oh, Eddie Jones, you know, what kind of character is he? Doesn't come across that well. But, yeah, would I like to play for him? Of course I would. Yeah, I think he's probably one of the best coaches in the world. He's proven that with his record. But I go back to the referees. Like, Wales are coming to the Aviva Stadium in a week and a half. You know, it wasn't that long ago where Wayne Barnes penalised me for a tip tackle at the end of the game. And a letter came back a week later after Lee Halfpenny slotted 3 points for them to win. And I think that was the opening game, and they went on to win a Grand Slam. And the letter came apologising that more or less, you know, a referee decision had cost us the game because I had been proven innocent that it wasn't a tip tackle. So, like, referee decisions, it cannot get to the stage where they're deciding a championship. So I totally agree with Keith. That was a try. Would Wales have went on to win that match? I probably don't think they would have. However, at that time, they could have got a little bit of momentum, and hindsight's a wonderful, wonderful thing. But referee decisions, it needs to be looked at. Year in, year out, we keep talking about it, Joe. It keeps coming up on your show, keeps coming up on everything to do with rugby. And I just think it needs to be addressed and for it to be nailed down, because it's not good enough.
No, it definitely isn't. I think there was a very good chance that actually Wales would have won that game at that point, that you begin to see the tension ratchet up on this English team. Anyway, we'll war game the potential outcomes if that try had been given a little bit later on in the week. But now we're going to Pyeongchang to talk to Cliona Foley. Cliona, good morning / evening to you. How's it going?
Morning, Ger. I love the way Pyeongchang runs off your mouth like that. It sounds so normal to be saying it. When about a week ago, nobody knew where Pyeongchang even was.
Not gonna lie,
It's good. There was a great morning here for the... Me neither, and I'm here. It was a really good morning actually, because all week really we've had Irish skiers, frustrated because the weather wasn't letting them compete in the alpine events. And this morning we had 2 in, particularly I think Tessa Bay and Pat McMillan also, but Tessa Bay in the giant slalom, the women's giant slalom, she was just an absolute star. She finished 50th of 79, and she's only just turned 20, and she really had a great run in it. And Pat also came down clean. He's only the 2nd Irishman ever to do the downhill, which is the Formula 1 really of skiing. Finished it and was thrilled really, I think, to get down and didn't really, he had one jump, but he took a bobble and one jump, and I said to him, he took a bobble, and he said, I don't even remember. He said, if you don't end up in the net, you just keep going.
It's pretty amazing really that we have athletes competing in these events when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, Tessa's born in France. Her maternal grandfather was born in Carlow and then moved to Dublin. So she has grown up on the French-Swiss border there, and she's been skiing all her life. Pat McMillan's an extraordinary story because, he played rugby, he made a Leinster under-19 squad with people like Tyke Furlong and Jack Conan, and he realised that he wasn't going to make the grade as a rugby player. He wasn't making an academy, and 5 years ago he said, well, you know what, I think I might be a decent skier. He had skied socially. So he's based in Austria, and he's over there with a gang of who are all from non-alpine nations, and they're trying to, if you like, get their foot on the World Cup ladder. So for him to get in there was pretty impressive, and to complete the downhill run, and actually he was only 9 seconds behind the winner, the Olympic champion.
That is
a lot of time in a downhill run.
That's the type of thing that other countries are really good at, where they have these tryout days for sports people and go, actually, you know what, you'd be a really good rower, and you would actually be a really good swimmer, or you would be a really good, it tends not to be swimming obviously, but you know what I mean, where we actually have those kind of the Brits were really good at it, and the New Zealanders are really good at it.
Yeah, and it's happened in Ireland as well. Somebody like Aileen Reid transferred over. She was a really good swimmer, and Triathlon Ireland are really big into that. And Cycling Ireland and Rowing Ireland are also 2 more as well, who have gone on talent identification, looked at athletes who were really good in one sport, but possibly we're looking to change or weren't making more progress, and see could they be better at something else. So his story is a really interesting story, and he's Clare, he's O'Gonlow, so what are the chances of somebody who's from near Killaloe down in Clare skiing the downhill, as I said, in the Olympics. So 2 debuts. He was 52nd, but Tess, she's only just turned 20, and she had to come down clean in the first run. You don't get a second run in giant slalom unless you finish clean, and she has never done that before. She has never made top 60 at World Championships to get a second run even. So what she did was incredible, because she came down, the first run was 1:22, 1 minute 22. The second run she did 1:18. She improved by 4 seconds on the second run, and she moved up 6 places to finish 50th. And her aim beforehand was to finish, and she said she thought if she could make top 50, that would be amazing, and she did it.
Okay, so what's next, Cliona? Who have we got to look forward to?
Well, the 2 of those are racing again tomorrow. It's their second race. Pat goes in the Super G, Super Giant Slalom, but downhill is really his race, if you like. And for Tess, she is in the slalom tomorrow. But again, I think she's a better Super G race. She would say that herself. And Thomas Besgaard also has his event, another event tomorrow, 15k. But his better event is the marathon, really, the 50k, which is at the end of next week. And then the one to watch out for next week, again, in terms of excitement, I think, and something completely different, is a guy called Brendan Bubba Newby. And he is a half-piper, but he's a half-pipe skier. And that is a really new event. It only came in Sochi. And again, these guys, the tricks they can do are pretty amazing. And you're gonna have fun with him next week, I think.
Just one last thing, Cliona. Have the conditions kind of calmed down a little bit over there? I see Michaela Schifrin is kind of feeling the brunt of it now. She's had to pull out of an event this weekend, and I know she won gold in Tess Arbe's event this morning.
She won gold this morning. And she hates the giant slalom. She has a real love hate with it. No, they're completely different. We all woke up to sunshine this morning, which was bizarre because yesterday was so bad. And they're going to be better for the next 2 days. So there's talk they could get bad again on Saturday, but it's the problem is that there's a backup in the schedule, so some of those multiple alpine skiers could get caught. But the conditions really, it's just this morning were extraordinary. It was one of those blue sky mountain days, and I think that really helped somebody like Tess Arbey. You know, the conditions were great, and she was really nervous. She said on the first run, and then the second run she just went for it. The one I missed this morning because I was chasing those two around the mountains, and I'm way slower than them, was the snowboard cross. And if anybody hasn't watched it, you know, for me it's one of the events I really love in the Winter Olympics. It's one of the newer ones. It's really wacky races. It's, you know, 4 people go down together around a series of bends, can knock each other over, and sometimes you get Olympic champion or world champion knocked out really early. The men's is just finished today, but the women's is coming up, and then next week they do it on skis now as well. So there's a snow cross. They're two events I think people will really, really enjoy as spectators.
Yeah, I think the collisions is kind of like the big thing when you're looking at a winter sport. What is the potential chance of collisions in this? The speed skating certainly kind of piqued our interest for that reason and that reason alone over the last couple of days.
Yeah, and this morning we should say as well, Axel Lund, Norwegian, who won the downhill. He is the oldest man to ever win an alpine gold, and also the Norwegians, who were brilliant traditionally cross-country skiers, have got so good now at alpine skiing, and he had never they'd never won a gold in downhill. So himself and his teammate took gold and silver, and there was pretty wild celebrations up there. It was a really, really big result for them.
Cliona, great stuff. Enjoy the rest of it, and we'll talk to you real soon. Thanks a million. Not a great line this morning from Pyeongchang. We can have a look at the last bit of Tess Arbey's, I think, going over the finish line this morning. Some video that Cliona would have taken from the press area. Yeah, so.
Allez, allez, Tess Arbey would be the chant if I was there.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
You should give that to them.
I know, I should, yeah. Top 50 finish, brilliant stuff. Well, so her mother's from Carlow, is it, or her father's from Carlow, moved to Dublin?
Maternal grandfather.
Oh, sorry, yes. I just forgot a conversation we had 5 minutes ago. I would love to go to the Winter Olympics.
I know, I've like, all these years I've been, the Winter Olympics, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
And now I'm kind of like, ooh, that looks very nice.
Yeah, and...
clean, crisp, fresh air. China in 4 years' time, though, so I might skip that one.
Whereabouts in China is it on? Who knows?
I mean...
Pyeongchang, for anybody wondering, is east South Korea. Just, I suppose, I don't know the scale of South Korea, but a good few kilometres south of the border anyway. So you're talking northeast South Korea is where it is. It's not really a city, it's more of a resort. And I think we're beyond the point now where people are getting Pyeongchang and Pyongyang mixed up. So Pyeongchang, much smaller population, but much nicer slopes. And a lot of fresh powder, as those snowboard kids like to say over there at the moment. Yeah.
South Korea, most of my South Korean knowledge comes from the 2002 World Cup.
Yeah.
Not going to lie.
Well, we all know how that ended up.
Seoul is pretty close to the demilitarised zone. I didn't realise that. I'm just looking at it there again. So it's kind of on the same longitude as Seoul.
Well, there you go. There's your geography lesson done there. You won't need to kind of top yourself up and saying, where are we going to Cliona this morning? You now know where Pyeongchang is.
Exactly. Coming up a little bit later on all of our social networks, you're going to see the Keith Andrews show. Kevin Doyle is going to join him in studio to talk about a brilliant career, really, when you consider the fact that he was heading over relatively late and ends up making a real nuisance of himself in the Premier League over a long, sustained period of time, and then ultimately has this really unfortunate end to his career where concussions caused him to retire early after a spell living in the States, in Colorado, which is supposed to be one of the nicest parts of the world to live in. So things worked out for Kevin Doyle. He was, if you were going to plot a course, yeah, I'll take that. I'd be pretty happy with that career.
Yeah, so would I. But like pre-Miami franchise, you'd probably pick Colorado.
Yeah.
Presumably where were they based? Denver? Or is it the Rapids, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm actually, I don't know.
Where?
Another piece of geography that we've blown with our ignorance. Anyway, that's coming up at 12:30 on all our social channels.
Kevin Doyle, Floyd Landis, Peyton Manning, the three great Coloradan if that's a word you use, sportsmen. I know the Mannings aren't from Colorado, are they?
No.
Neither is Floyd Landis, but he lives there. So that's good enough for me. So that's the three pieces of sporting knowledge and Carmelo Anthony's spell with the Nuggets as well. They're kind of the four great sporting moments that I connect with Colorado.
There you go. Kieran Donaghy on basketball coming up tonight, and Kerry football, of course, on Off the Ball. We're back tomorrow morning live, as always, from 7:45 a.m. Kevin Kilban, Mike McCarthy. You can watch back today's OTB AM over on youtube.com/Off the Ball. Make sure you subscribe there, because we put up a much broader range of stuff that doesn't make it to air on this show. You get to see the full goodness of all of our in-depth interviews, if that's what you're like. And of course, you can get us on all our podcasts on iTunes, offtheball.com, and whatever. That's pretty much all we've time for today. Good luck.